You know, Adam Sakir, the husband's
Oh no, what's going on?
he had a stroke, but not in the heart. You know,
Oh, no.
Adam Sakir.
Sorry to hear that. Hello, Nina. Nice to see you. I think everybody's in the Thanksgiving mood. All right, let's get busy. So just a brief recap. Anybody wants a copy? We got a few left. Mayim Rabim, the floodwaters of Noach, represent the and as we've discussed, it's not limited to making a living. It's really engagement in the material world, but it's really epitomized by making a living because that's where we spend most of our time. We do take care of our bodies, hygiene, eating, sleeping, but what really consumes the majority of our consciousness is making a living. So that's why the Alter Rebbe specifically focuses on that. King Solomon says, Mayim Rabim la yuchlu chabes ha'ava, that despite the fact that one is engaged so much in the material world, nonetheless, it cannot extinguish the inherent love that we have for God. The Alter Rebbe asked the question why the floodwaters are attributed to Noach, May Noach. They're called the waters of Noach. Why are they called the waters of Noach? When it really wasn't his fault, it was the generation's fault. So the Alter Rebbe says that we're talking about the positive angle on the floodwaters is that these many waters, the many waters of making a living, is actually a positive thing. Why? Because without the challenge of making a living, we don't uncover the inherent love that we have for God. In other words, if everything just flowed, we would have whatever love we have, but when we face challenge, when we face the struggle, it brings out the deeper dimension of who we are. The Alter Rebbe deviated a little bit to tell us how we make that happen, that when we contemplate in prayer how every blade of grass has its spiritual origin, in other words, every physical creation is guided from above. That's the physical objects as well as all the physical experiences. When we recognize that the struggle of making a living is all part of the divine plan. So what do? We uncover in that experience that this is not a benign, materialistic chance event, but it's all orchestrated, it's all divinely orchestrated to bring out the godliness that's within us and the godliness that's within the world. The question on the table is, what is it about the material engagement specifically that brings out the superior quality of love for God? Put in different ways. The soul is a godly being. It's a part of God. Dr. Rebbe in the second chapter of Tanya says that the soul is a chelik alekami mal mamish. It's a part of God literally from above. And what happens? The soul comes into a body, goes into the world, deals with all this materialistic stuff, and it's specifically in that space that the true power of the soul is revealed. It sounds counterintuitive, sounds paradoxical. The soul should have its love when it's unencumbered by the body. Why is it specifically in the body that the soul actually discovers this deep love that it has for God? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Any questions, comments, discomforts? Okay. Yes. Yes.
Seems like money comes so easily to them. Does that mean that they don't get that benefit that you're talking about?
Good question. So we mentioned some of the. I read this recently that Elon Musk makes I think like in an hour what every U.S. teacher combined makes in a year. Still. So it would be nice if he gave 1 hour of his earnings to the teachers, and then maybe we can raise the quality of our teachers across the country. So, but if you think Elon Musk doesn't think about his money, you're mistaken. In other words, it's not necessarily only about the struggle, to earn a living. That's where we spend our time. 2 weeks ago was Bernie Marcus's yahrzeit. Bernie Marcus made a lot of money later in life. I mean, he made a lot of money earlier in life, but he made his real money later in life. And one of the things that his relationship to his money was very fascinating. I heard this from him, that he felt a responsibility to the money. He felt that God had blessed him with this money and he had a responsibility to use the money to make the world a better place. That's not an easy job, right? By the way, giving away money is not easy. It sounds like it should be easy, but it's not easy, especially if you want to do it responsibly. So, and people who have a lot of money spend a lot of time managing their money, worrying about their money. We had mentioned, I think you were here, that class, Howard Hughes, right, who was so obsessed with his money that he died in a state of fear that somebody was going to take his money, right? So money is very consuming, right? It really, most crimes happen in this world around intimacy issues and money issues, because those are primary drivers in the human condition. So anyway, that answers the question. Okay, so let's figure out why it is that it's specifically in the journey on this earth, in the body, that the soul actually uncovers this great power. So on page 18, Chai, the bottom of the page, the Hainu. This is because Lefisha Besharsha Lamaila Maila Shirish Nefesh Abahamis Gavoya Yoser Mibechinas Nefesh Elikis. Fascinating comment that the animal soul, in its original source, is even higher than the godly soul. That's a radical statement. The animal soul, which is what creates the challenge, so to speak, for the godly soul, in its origin, is even higher than the godly soul. Like it says in the verse, so there's a very interesting short section in the Torah. I don't think it's in this week's Parsha, but it's coming up. At the end of the Torah portion, the Torah has this kind of cryptic story. It says, these are the kings that ruled before there was a king for Israel, for the children of Israel. And it lists 7 kings, and it tells us their names. Vayimloich, so-and-so, this person ruled. Vayamas, and he died. Vayimloich Tachtav, and after him, in his stead, ruled such and such a king, and then he died. That's the whole discussion. So according to Kabbalah, the kings that ruled, which we're going to talk about in a second, that ruled before the children of Israel is a reference to the godly soul. Who are the kings? The kings are the animal soul. So these are the kings, these are the animal soul who ruled before the godly soul, meaning the animal soul precedes the godly soul. So what are these kings? Who are these kings? So we've discussed this many times, but we'll briefly recap. In the second verse of the Torah, it says, in the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the earth. And then the next verse says, and the earth was tohu vavohu, which means, in the Bible translations, it says it was chaotic and empty. And there was darkness over the face of the deep, whatever that means. But tohu vavohu, chaotic and empty, according to Kabbalah, is a reference to a created world. There was a world that preceded this world. What was that world? That world was called tohu. Tohu means chaos. It was a spiritual world, a very powerful spiritual world, and it preceded the world of order, or the world of tikkun, which is the world that we live in. What is the world of tikkun? So in the world of tikkun, there has to be balance. Like Tevye said, right? There has to be balance. You gotta make sure you don't lean too far this way, lean too far that way. What does that mean? That in administering kindness, if you're not careful, you can actually hurt someone. You can do too much kindness. You can spoil your children. You can give kindness to someone who's going to use your kindness. You can give money to a drunk instead of giving them food, right? So there's a lot of things that we can do that will actually negatively affect someone in the name of kindness. Conversely, discipline or gevura, if you don't temper gevura, you can hurt someone as well. A judge who administers justice without any kind of intention in that could hurt someone. I remember a story of a judge. I think this was somewhere up in New York, where there was a couple of kids had painted swastikas on a synagogue. They're kids, idiots, right? So according to the law, they could have been thrown into jail. There's a maximum sentence, but the judge did something smart. He gave them community service hours, specifically in an old age home for Holocaust survivors, right? It's brilliant. So there's justice there, there's discipline there, but it's tempered with kindness. Alvin, you had a question?
No, I wanted to say a comment about kindness, overdue kindness, from a scientific point of view. There was a contribution made by people giving free shoes to a country that had no shoes. The children had no shoes, so they produced these shoes as part of social entrepreneurship. This company was making these, about them. They made these shoes, but it put the shoe manufacturers in that country out of business. So they went into deeper poverty because of the kindness. It caused more poverty.
So intentions were good, but it wasn't thought through.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Appreciate that. So that's the nature of this world, the world of tikkun. But let's think about it for a second. What we're basically saying is that kindness as a value is has to be diluted. But isn't kindness a wonderful ideal unto itself? Conversely, the same thing you could say about discipline. Discipline, in order for it to be effective, it needs to be diluted. But isn't discipline as a value unto itself worthwhile? And the answer is yes. However, because we live in a world that requires balance, so therefore it has to be tempered. In Kabbalistic terminology, the energy, let's say, of chesed, or the energy of gevura, we would call that light or flow. Flow needs to have a vessel to receive it. The vessel has to be designed or has to accommodate the flow that goes into it, which is why when you have a drunk who's hungry and you give them money, the vessel is not going to be a good recipient for your kindness. Or a country that needs shoes and you just give them a bunch of free shoes, the vessel is not going to be a good recipient for the kindness that you're administering. So vessels need to be aligned with the light. Good morning. Good morning. In the world that preceded this world of order or this world of balance, in that world, you had the flow or the light in its purest form. It was doomed because what happens is as the flow came from the attribute of chesed, let's say, from the attribute of kindness, it eventually did not have a vessel that was able to receive it. And the vessel, you keep on putting water into a balloon, the balloon is going to explode. So the kindness that was being put into the vessel eventually shattered. Now, another way to explain this is also discussed in the teachings of Chassidus, which may be a little confusing, but we'll use it anyway. It's another explanation. Each attribute felt. Actually, I'll give you a good parallel. Lag BaOmer, right? Lag BaOmer, we commemorate the end of the plague that struck the students of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the author of the statement, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. The Torah says you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He says, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is the all-encompassing rule of the Torah. And the Talmud says that the students of Rabbi Akiva lo nagu kavod zeh b'zeh. They did not treat each other with honor. I says, how could it be? The teacher himself, who taught this statement that his students, and all of them died except for 5 students. It's crazy. How does that, how do students who are dedicated, and they were righteous people, they were dedicated to their teacher. So they had a problem with vessels. They had too much light and didn't have the right vessels. How so? So, and we find this a lot in the world today. We call it extremism, right? Religious extremism, political extremism, any kind of extremism basically says, listen, I know the right way. You don't know the right way. I'm going to teach you. And I care for you. So I really want you to see the world my way. And until you see the world my way, I'm going to beat it into you, right? That's basically political and religious extremism. But that's not true love. That's self-love. So what happens? You burn a lot of bridges. You chase a lot of people away. Unfortunately, a lot of people get killed in this kind of process as well, right? But in the name of love, authentic love, I love you so much that I want you to see it my way. I think they call that codependency. But that's what was going on in the world that preceded the world of order. The light was so great that it didn't have space for anything else. And eventually, the vessels that were intended to contain this light shattered. And when they shattered, these sparks fell into this world. Those sparks became the most physical, base, animalistic dimensions of this world. Now, if you think this was a mistake, like God messed up in the process, it wasn't. It was very intentional. And in fact, we say in the prayer daily that God renews constantly the work of creation from the beginning. In the beginning, God created, God renews it every day. So this process is repeating itself every single day. So why do we need this world of chaos if it's not sustainable? Because in that world of chaos, you have the pure ideal of each of these attributes. In other words, chesed lives in its purest state in this world of tohu. But because God's intention in creation was not this earth, which is a world of balance, so therefore that world was not sustainable. And it's specifically in this world where we're able to create this balance. Yes?
Did the world have any physical aspect or spiritual?
Strictly spiritual. Strictly spiritual. So one of the things that lived in this world of Tohu is what the prophet Ezekiel, when he ascended to heaven, and we read about this on Shavuos, he ascended to heaven, and he saw all of the heavenly works. A lot of our knowledge around angels and about the divine chariot, these were all from Yechezkel's prophecy, where he sees the angels and he describes the angels and he hears them proclaiming, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 Baruch Kved Hashem Imkeme, blessed is God in his place, and so on and so forth. This is all part of the divine chariot. Who knows what animals were on the divine chariot? Anybody? No? Good guess, though.
Bull.
There was a bull, there was an ox, yeah, one. There was a lion.
Bull.
I'm sorry?
What animals depicting it in Hashemayim?
Yeah, in the divine chariot. There was a bull or an ox, that family, a lion, and an eagle. The lion and the bull and the eagle ultimately descended down here. The one we're going to focus on is the bull. The bull, the ox, is an animal. It's the epitome of an animal, right? A lion is ferocious. It has other manifestations in terms of the physical reality, but the bull represents brute strength. The bull is the animal within us. Now, not everybody has a bull inside of them. Some people have a puppy. Some people have a deer, a sheep, a lamb, right? There's parenthetically, we read about the mitzvah to return lost objects. And the Torah says, al-chamor, al-shor, al-chamor, al-seh, on a donkey, an ox, and on a sheep, and on a garment. There's 4 examples of things that we're obligated to return. So according to Hasidus, these four things are sometimes our soul gets lost in these other worlds of the donkey, the bull, and so on. And our job is to return the soul from there. The Torah gives us classic examples of four categories of different types of animals, so to speak, right? You can have a donkey. What's the quality of a donkey? Stubborn. Donkeys are stubborn, right? There's a stubbornness there. It also says that a donkey, even in the height of the Tammuz equinox, even in the height of summer, it's cold, right? So some people, everybody could be excited and they're the cold one. They're constantly throwing cold water on the situation, or they're stubborn. A bull is a beast, right? It has brute strength. A sheep is actually a really dangerous lost object, because the sheep is like a lamb. It does whatever you tell it to. You can't tell if it's on fire or not. It's just, yeah, sure, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. You want me to be religious, I'll be religious. You want me not to be, whatever, wherever the wind is blowing. Anyway, so bring it back here. So the ox or the bull in the divine chariot, which comes from this world of chaos, when it descends down here, is the animal drive. So now we understand that the animal drive actually has a very high origin. So it's not this monster that's trying to torment us. It's a force that's trying to bring something out within us. And what happens when you take an ox and you put a yoke on it? You can plow a field. You can do all kinds of powerful things. The soul without the body doesn't have this power. It could be a wonderful spirit. It's a wonderful part of God. But without the body, it can't do anything. Think about it. Every single one of the 613 commandments has a physical manifestation. You can't even love God without your heart, your physical heart. You can't make a blessing without a physical cup of coffee. You can't eat matzah without eating water, right? We need all of these physical objects, physical manifestations in order for us to be able to actually serve God. So all of that physical stuff, all of that physical manifestation comes from this very high origin. This makes sense? So what is the function of the animal drive? It's because it has such a high origin, it has the power to bring out something within us that we otherwise would not. It's a total shift in thinking. Potentially, if we choose to be conscious of it when we bump up against challenge in life. We can either see the challenge as trying to crush us, or we can see the challenge as trying to bring out the best in us. Imagine if your trainer, puts an extra couple of weights on your thing. You said, what are you tormenting? What are you torturing me for? Right? It's not what the trainer's trying to do. It's trying to bring out the best in you. And it hurts sometimes. And unfortunately, that's the way God created the world, unfortunately. Fortunately, I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that. God knows what he's doing, right? But this is the reality of the creative structure, is that we have to face challenge in order to bring out the best within us. And it's specifically the animal soul that has this higher origin that brings out the best within the godly soul. Yes?
Speak of the yoke of God.
Yeah. Yeah. There are multiple relationships to Torah. One of them is yoke. And the differences in the relationships is, I believe, is where we are in a given moment, right? We don't always feel burdened by the Torah. Sometimes we do, right? As a Jew, sometimes we feel the joy in being Jewish, and sometimes we feel burdened. And depending on how we're relating in that moment, we have to look at different dimensions of Torah. Sometimes we have to say, yeah, it's a yoke, because the yoke is there to bring out the best in us. Yeah. Yeah.
They say the same thing in yoga, that there is a yoke in the asanas, the positions, and the spirit of yoga as well.
Yeah. The principle, the principle is found in a lot of different experiences in life, but according to Kabbalah, we understand the inner working of it. So let's continue on page 19.
Just yourself thinking, what's in this lesson? You just wanted to say this is here to make me stronger and move on. that what you're saying? I mean, to me, it works better that way, if Val knows what you're saying about.
Say again, not to say,
Don't busy yourself trying to see that in what's in this thing that approaches you. You're better just saying, okay, well, it's here to make me stronger, blah, blah, blah. I understand what I'm saying.
yeah, I do. I think, so in Hebrew we say yesh v'yesh, which means there is and there is. Meaning sometimes when our brains are offline because of the pressure, the best we can do is just say, this is what God wants from me, I'm doing it, right? But at other times it's not enough. Are you taking the Kabbalah of Meaning course? You're not. You should. No. So we just finished the third lesson of the Kabbalah of Meaning course, the JLI course, and there's a big focus on this theme that when we recognize that each of our actions are part of a symphony of God's master plan, then number one, we relate to our personal challenges differently. Number two, we're able to dig into it and say, what is this meant to be for me? And I'll give you an example. It's my favorite example because I think it's one of those things about the human condition that we ought to laugh at ourselves. You go to an airport, and hopefully the delayed flights are coming to an end, but Thanksgiving is coming, so if anybody's traveling, good luck. Your flight gets delayed, and suddenly everybody's falling apart. You never got delayed in your life. You come to a meeting and someone doesn't show up, you get stuck in traffic. But in the airport, it's a whole different level. Everybody freaks out. People start screaming. They get angry at the poor lady behind the counter. She didn't do anything. She's just announcing, sorry, your flight's delayed. And suddenly she's the criminal, right? What's going on there? So when you're centered and you say, there's two ways to look at it. You say, look, I don't know what this is all about, but I know it's part of God's plan. So I'm going to harness my animal soul, not to freak out. I'm going to anchor my animal soul to say that there's a greater purpose here. But you could say, let me look for that purpose. Let me start looking for that purpose. And if you speak to any Chabad rabbi who's stuck in an airport at a flight, they're going to start looking for people to put on tefillin with. That's the way it goes. Sometimes we get to see where the dots connect, but I think the most important thing is, there are those that definitely will argue with me on this, but our work, if the animal soul's origin is in this high place, so it's actually the work with the animal soul itself that is the purpose. In other words, when we're able to respond to a crisis, to a challenge, and if all we do is pause and say, my body is reacting to what's going on here in a negative way, and I need to know that in this experience is the highest expression of the divine. If you can do that, mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. Because what you've done is you've taken the concealment of godliness and you said, oh, I see you. I see exactly what's going on here. Now, when you're able to then say, okay, now let me take a positive action, that's great. When you're able to look back and say, oh, I see why my flight needed to get delayed or whatever, that's wonderful. We don't always get to see that. We don't always get to see the purpose. Even if you start looking for people to put on tefillin, you may not find anyone, right? That's the way it goes. But if you're looking, sometimes you'll see the purpose and sometimes not. But that's a sidebar. That's kind of God's reward, that because you anchored yourself and you said, I'm going to make purpose out of this, sometimes you're actually able to see the purpose in it. But if you're able to stay centered within yourself, that is the purpose. Yeah, please.
In my world, we say, in the struggle is the growth. No struggle, no growth. So when we are coasting, everything looks fantastic, and sometimes we coast. But all of a sudden, something happens, and it's a struggle. And in that struggle is the opportunity to see the godliness. The problem is that sometimes we are so much in it.
Right.
That it's hard to see that, like I had a fight with somebody in my family, and at night I was crying and I was thinking, I know there is a purpose for this, but it really hurts.
Yeah.
So in the moment, it's yucky. It's
Yeah.
like you don't want to have it. But from there, we grew the relationship. So, we figured out what was the problem and we talked to each other. So that's the growth of the relationship, the growth for me to see how what I was saying or I did or whatever was not, I was wounding the other person. So, that's the growth.
Yeah.
And that's the godliness that you talk about.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to add one other point because I think this is really important. We mess up a lot. And when we mess up, then we become, I was just listening to a song on the way over here where the singer is talking about the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that's trying to bring us down. And it says, all you want to do is get me to do the bad thing and then make me feel bad about having done the bad thing, which then perpetuates doing more bad things. So even in the mistakes that we make, when we mess up, like we have all this knowledge, don't think you're going to walk out of here and you've got this master. It doesn't work that way. We can work towards a place of excellence, but we're not going to walk out of here with perfection. We'll never get to a place of perfection. Only God is perfect. So I guarantee you, if I'm a betting man, that between now and 120, you're going to mess up a couple of times. Very likely. How do we relate to when we mess up? That's also part of the divine plan. And if we can pause even within that, we also are mastering the process. In other words, when we mess up, instead of going to a place of shame, if we're able to say, whoa, this whole animal soul that God gave me with its particulars, because I got a different animal soul than you do, this animal soul that God gave me, this is the one that is challenging me to navigate this mistake that I made.
Can I say one thing? So, if you like soccer, this is Messi. Messi is number 10 everywhere. He's in Inter Miami now. He's always 10. Around the world, he's the best in the world right now in soccer. His name is Messi.
He's Messi.
And I always say that from 1 to 10, life is a 10. But life, for me, I'm a fan, is Messi.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Okay, we get the point? Good. Page 19. The animal soul, despite the fact that it has this very high origin, through the shattering of the vessels of the world of Tohu, as we've mentioned, the animal soul descended very low, like it says, and these kings reigned and they died, meaning they shattered. How many times does it say kings? Who remembers how many kings I said before? 7. There are 7 emotional characteristics. That's where the dominant shattering takes place, is within the emotional characteristics. But in their origin, they are exceedingly higher than the godly soul. And therefore, therefore, even as they descend below into the body, this animal soul, it has a certain power over the godly soul. Because their origin comes from the spiritual attribute of malchus, or melucha, of royalty, of kingship, which is the level of exaltedness. Let me explain what that means. The capacity for us to have a self-consciousness comes from the fact that our origin is exalted from us. In other words, if our origin was in our consciousness, if it was not exalted, we wouldn't have a self-consciousness. Simple as that. If you're an angel, you are in a consciousness of the divine presence, so therefore you're a robot. You're a spiritual robot doing exactly what you're programmed to do. Because down here, the divine energy is exalted, so therefore we have a self-consciousness, and therefore we have free choice.
Exalted means?
Exalted means uplifted. So this quality of exaltedness, this quality of being lifted up, the other side of that coin is ego or arrogance, right? So these divine energies, remember the story of Rabbi Akiva's students, that's an abundance of light. where they say my way or the highway. I got the right path. That's the animal soul as it descends into the body, is our ego. So the ego is an extremely powerful tool or energy, not tool. It is a strong tool, but in our body, in our experience, the godly soul is overpowered by the ego. That's why it's such a struggle, because the godly soul only wants to do what God wants, but it's competing with a force that's so powerful, which in this earth shows up as ego, but in heaven it shows up as these very powerful divine lights, and therefore it's a real struggle.
Is that kind of when you're thinking about like internal struggle, when you're like, okay, I'm gonna go do this thing, and then your internal body is like, no, don't do that because it's whatever, not kosher, or it's not a good thing to do. Like, is that the animal soul and the godly soul kind of internally?
For the most part, part of the struggle. So first of all, yes, but part of the struggle is actually the animal soul is very wise, and it knows how it's in Yiddish, in Hasidic circles, it's actually called the klugener, which means the smart one. Could also mean the sly one, because sometimes we can cloak our self-interest in the name of something very idealistic, right? So that's all part of self-discovery, is trying to figure out, okay, where is this really coming from? Is this just feeding my ego, or is this really altruistic? Yes.
I just want to talk about the definition of the animal soul by what you were saying, and also the spiritual, having mastery over the animals, the spiritual aspect of the divine. Of course, everything is divine. Having a spiritual aspect, having mastery over the lower or the physical realm, where this particular guru lived with cobras, poisonous. He lived with them in his house, and then he left the house, and three thieves came into his house, and the cobras bit them. But he wouldn't bit the enlightened guru, because he was in tune with the higher. The same thing with Daniel in the lion's den. The lions have the animal soul, but they would not eat death. Well, these are concepts. And I also personally had situations where I walked into a yard of very vicious dogs, and Hashem, or for whatever reason, pushed them against the wall, and until I shut the door, then they went to go back into the animal state. So I know and had experience. Somehow, I don't know if it was me, I was not being the master, I was Hashem protecting me from harm, but I say sometimes the interference of the higher spiritual force over the animal soul.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether this fits.
No, I think it's all along the same theme. In other words, when I say we won't achieve perfection, but we can achieve excellence. It's about becoming more conscious within ourselves of the true essence of who we are and the true purpose of the challenge. Now, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole now, but part of the animal soul's experience is also neuro pathways that are created in childhood. And the gift of modern science today is that we know through various different forms of healing is that we can temper those neural pathways. We can even create new neural pathways. In other words, just because we react in a certain situation, our reaction in a certain situation is coming from the animal soul, right? When we were a child, we heard an alarm go off. So every time we hear a certain sound, our body tenses up. That's a neural pathway that belongs to the animal soul. We can work on that so that we don't have that same reaction. Now, we can't master all of it, but we can work towards it. And this is I think a really important point in the world we live in. Healing has become an objective unto itself. So people are obsessed with healing, and that's not the purpose of healing. The purpose of healing is to live, right? So when we could understand this mechanism, then our healing is in order for us to live, to lower the temperature on the intensity of the animal soul, which, by the way, is most effective when we increase the frequency of the godly soul. The more I've said this many times, we're sitting in Jeff's place, people in recovery have a spiritual practice. And people in recovery will tell you is that they have to do their spiritual practice every day. What does the spiritual practice do for them? It keeps them aligned, right? Whether it's meditation, helping another person, journaling, keeps people aligned. And Judaism also has a spiritual practice. We pray every morning. We say the Shema before we go to sleep. You give tzedakah every day. You do a little Torah study. What does that do for us? It reminds us what we're really all about, so that when we go into the world doesn't dominate us. Even if it's challenging, we keep ourselves centered and say, okay, this is a moment. I'm called to do something higher here. I'm called to see beneath the facade, to see the godly purpose in it, and that is very empowering. Another interesting point, page 20. Fascinating point that the human requires animals and other food without which we wouldn't survive. What is that about? The angels don't need to eat people to survive, but people need to eat higher forces or seemingly lower forces, but we need that in order to survive. Why? Because in their origin of origins, they are higher than the souls. There's a beautiful discourse in the Alter Rebbe. In the Torah, it says that not by bread alone does man live, but by that which comes out of God's mouth. So the Alter Rebbe explains that the Baal Shem Tov teaches that there are 10 utterances with which God created the world. God said, let there be light. God said, let there be a firmament. God said, let the earth, produce vegetation and so on. The word of God that he uttered to bring these things into being is continuous. And that lives within the food. So it's not the bread that sustains us. It's the word of God that's within the bread. So when we eat the bread, which seemingly is a lower life form, we are accessing the divine energy that originates in the world of Tohu that precedes even the godly soul. It's fascinating. Yes.
Looking at that first paragraph about man eating animals, but not vice versa.
Correct.
English, very different. In that.
You know what? I translated it incorrectly. I translated it as malachim and it's maichalim. I'm sorry. I messed that up. Even if the point is correct, I did not translate it correctly. But go ahead. Yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. It's a true point, but that's not what he says. But you're right. So the point that he says here is that the food does not need the person. Now, it does need the person to cause it to grow in general, even though there are plenty of foods that grow without people. But the essential point is that food doesn't need to eat people, right? Because the food is ultimately higher than people in its origin. So it doesn't need people doesn't need to consume of the quality of the human in order to sustain itself. Third paragraph, Vilazois, and therefore, Ayedei Yeridas v'hislapshus nefesh elikis, this is the punchline. Through the descent and the enclothing of the godly soul, b'nefesh habahamis dafka, in the animal soul, specifically, intentionally, lasoik b'tirdois u'machshavos haparnasa b'nyanim gashmim, to be occupied with the burdens and the thoughts, the machinations of making a living, specifically in material matters, Shehema nikrayim Mayim Rabim Kanal, which are the many waters of which we spoke earlier. So one can reach the place of love that's spoken about in the Shema, to love Hashem your God with all your might, meaning the totality of the person, all the power within the person. Shubligvo, this infinite, this limitless capacity to love God can be expressed specifically through our engagement with the material world, Kanal, as mentioned above. Shehi madrega hayoser gavoya, which is an exceedingly high level, than it was prior to coming into the body, where there it only enjoyed the radiance of the divine presence, but not the divine presence itself. I think this is something that we need to meditate on. I don't mean like go on a mountaintop and spend an hour meditating, but I think we need to process this. It's a really powerful idea, but we need to bring it into our consciousness. We need to bring it into our experience, because it's very real. It's a very real experience. I don't know if anybody here read Hostage by Ali Sharabi, a new book that just came out. It's a fascinating story. I mean, besides just giving us an insight into that dark world, but the fascinating story of the human condition, and a person who looked for hope, looked for meaning, looked for responsibility throughout his time in captivity. And it literally helped him survive. It helped his body survive. And we don't need to be in such a dark place to feel this, right? You can experience this in relationships, in marriage, relationships with children. We can experience this in our inner struggle when you're struggling whether to eat the piece of cake or not. I don't mean to be trivial, but even when it comes to a decision, should I eat this piece of cake or not? What's going on inside of you? What's the struggle? What's the dilemma? Where's the tension coming from? What's the purpose of this struggle? And life is filled with this. There's a million decisions that we make a day that live in this tension. Maybe not a million, but endless decisions that we make in a given day that live in this tension. And when we deepen what it is that we're struggling with, it becomes extremely liberating to live on a much different dimension. Furthermore, if we think about the body, right, this thing, there's a fantastic meditation. There's a fellow named Yaakov Kirsch. He does meditations. I'm trying to get him. He lives in Israel. I'm trying to get him to come to Atlanta. There's one meditation I listen to over and over again whenever I'm feeling a little misaligned, because he basically describes that. He helps explain in this meditation what the body is and what is our consciousness, right? Our consciousness is what gives the body its reality. But what is the real consciousness? We give so much credence to the body because of our consciousness, and we make that the most real thing, but the body is just a container for a true reality. And the true reality is the reality of the soul. And if we can tap into that reality, which is hard to do, and it's definitely impossible to do in a perpetual state, but if we can tap into that reality, then when we encounter the body's reality, which is not real. What do I mean it's not real? It is real, but it's not real, meaning it's not truth. It's just the meaning that we give to the present moment. Then we're able to look at that experience in a totally different light. It's real because in this moment, if I'm struggling whether to eat the chocolate cake or not, that's a real challenge because I'm conscious of that. But what's the real reality here? It's not the chocolate cake. It's about the inner struggle of the decision. That's the reality. That's the godly reality. And if I can pause the external reality of the body and tap into the reality of the godly soul, then I say, okay, what's really going on here is that God wants me to expose something that I would otherwise not be able to expose if I didn't have the consciousness of the struggle. It's very radical, but it's very real and it's very transformative. So if we can pause and let this sink in, I'm not saying this moment, but go home, eat breakfast, and then close your eyes for 5 minutes and try to experience what this is all about. We begin to feel it in our body. We begin to feel it in our soul. And it becomes becomes transformative. It's a slow process of changing that frequency, but we really have the capacity to do that.
And I think we can find it in the smallest thing. If you get nervous if somebody crosses you on the road, if you get upset if you don't find a parking close to the supermarket, if you, whatever those little things are,
Exactly.
that's a window.
That's a moment. And again, I want to emphasize, because I think we're so susceptible to this, right? You get frustrated that you didn't find the parking spot, and then you tap into this mess. But then you move then into a place of judgment why you didn't tap into messaging before you got frustrated. And that itself perpetuates the animal soul. Instead of really, and it's hard, but we really have to let go and say, this is the master plan. I got frustrated, I tapped into the messaging, and I let my frustration go. That's a victory, because what you just did is you discovered God in a benign, mundane event. That's powerful. It's so powerful.
So,
Go ahead. Ronnie was first.
I had a bad
He's
day.
itching for a question.
Well, I had a bad day the other day, and it speaks very much to what you're talking about. It just dawned on me, there's the difference between attempting to be in control and versus being in the line. What's my role here? And so that tension, sometimes I lost it. It was a bad day for Ronnie. So it just dawned on me that I don't need to be God. I need to find out what it is there is for what is my role at home.
Yeah.
And to be able to step back, that's the hard part. Disengage and have perspective, and then I can maybe discover what my role is and what action I should take. Sometimes it's just not doing anything, just accepting what it is and
Yeah.
be with it until some clarity. I've got a lot of work.
Don't we all? There's a form of therapy I've spoken about before called IFS, Internal Family Systems, which doesn't mean your wife and your children, but your internal family. And there's a principle there called unblending, which is that, so the first thing is differentiation, and then is unblending. So differentiation is to be able to separate yourself from the experience, and then unblending within myself to say, what's going on inside of me? There's multiple parts that are responding here. It's not the I that's responding. It's something else that's responding, and I need to identify it. When I can identify it, then I can begin to deal with it. Like, I don't own it. I don't own it from an essence perspective so much. Like, I'm not a bad guy because my blood pressure went up. There's a part of me that's an animal that has an experience, and that part of me is responding to the circumstance. Okay, now I see it. Now I can deal with it. And sometimes the animal's response is too intense. And you're right. Sometimes the best thing to say is, okay, I realize that my animal is like completely triggered now, and I'm just gonna take a back seat until it calms down. That's a victory. That's actually a victory. There's no judgment in that. That's a victory. Because there are all kinds of animals. Sometimes you gotta put the dog in the in the doghouse so that it calms down. Go ahead, Scott.
What's your name?
Mariana.
She was saying like the example with the parking spot, So are you saying that you just say, well, this is just not meant to be and move on, that's it? Is that what you're saying? In other words?
No.
Okay, so what are you saying? So you don't get the spot that you want.
What I'm saying is that
So then,
the fact that you react to not finding a spot close by means something within you. It means that you have a need. For some reason, you have a need to find a spot close. I mean, some people don't. It's a personal item inside of you. In the same way that you have that reaction for the parking spot, it's probably all over your life. You just don't see it. You see it in the moment you are going to park. But then maybe you have a daughter and she says something and you have a fuse that goes off. And it's the same reason why you get frustrated when you don't find the parking. It's what the rabbi was saying before, that it comes from the unconscious.
Imagine someone else in that same situation. Just imagine someone, you may actually know such a person who might be working on that parking spot, and somebody comes in and takes it, and they're just calm about it. In other words, let's say somebody else takes that happens. You're you're waiting, and somebody else comes in and takes your parking spot.
Next couple.
Right? So you don't lie to yourself and say that person's not a jerk for taking your parking spot. But within yourself, you can imagine someone else who will say, look, that guy's a jerk. I'm not going to get caught up in this. Why am I getting caught up in it? That's not about the circumstance. It's about me. That's my work. There's a famous story of a guy who's waiting for a parking spot, right? And he's driving back and forth in the parking lot. Everything's full. And he turns to God and he says, God, if you help me find the parking spot, I'll go to shul this Shabbos. And he's driving up and down and he can't find the parking spot. And he says, God, if you help me find a parking spot, I'll go to shul for the next 2 weeks. No parking spot. He says, God, if you find the parking spot for me, I'll go to shul for the next 4 weeks. Suddenly a car pulls out and he parks and he says, God, I figured it out. Thank you. Deal is off, right? So that's anyway.
But so say like there's an other person's waiting for the spot, there's a phone there or something, a kid swings in there and takes the spot. So you're supposed to, so that's being, and I saw it, I would flare off on what's right and wrong that happened, right? I mean, I would, so those situations, I'm like, well, so what would be the other way of doing it? So, well, it's just a schmuck and move on. I mean, right, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I want to answer your question, but I want to do 2 things first. Okay, I want to read the next 2 lines, and then I want to give you a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, and then I'm going to answer your question because I think it'll enhance the question. Last 2 lines on the page 20, because this is the punchline. How do we bring about? How do we access? How do we uncover the real power of the love of the godly soul? Through iskafia, which is overpowering or subduing the temptation of the animal soul, the ishapcha, and the transformation of darkness to light, which is the advantage of light that comes from a place of darkness. There's 2 general modes of dealing with the animal soul to our conversation. Sometimes the mode to deal with the animal soul is no. I'm not listening to you. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. I'm not going to react the way you want me to react. That's one mode. The other is, I'm going to do this thing, but I'm going to do it intentionally. I'm not just going to eat that food because I'm driven by an animal drive, but I'm going to eat that food with intention to serve God. I'm experiencing this challenge at work. I'm going to look at that challenge as a divine opportunity to bring out some positive thing here. So these are 2 modes in how we, in either circumstance, we access the godly soul. Give me a minute. So the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov is as follows, that the Baal Shem Tov says a very fascinating thing. He says a fault that you see in another is your own, you're looking in a mirror. Now the question is, why is that? The Rebbe asked this question, why isn't, maybe God showed you someone else's fault so you can help fix them. So the Rebbe says like this beautiful teaching. He says, if you see a fault in another person and you see it from a place of judgment, God would never show you someone else's shortcoming for a negative purpose. So if you see judgment, you're looking at yourself. Now that doesn't mean that you can't find yourself in a circumstance where you see a fault in another person and without judgment, you make an effort to help them. A beautiful teaching that I read on yesterday's Parsha. It says, the beginning of the Parsha, it says that Yitzchak and Rivka were married and they didn't have children. And the Torah says that Yitzchak, Vayetar Yitzchak l'noichach ishtoi, that Yitzchak prayed opposite his wife. But the word for prayer is a very unusual word for prayer. Usually we use the word tefillah, v'yispalel, right? That he prayed. Here the expression vayetar means, it's a different type of expression. Literally it means he pleaded. But the word in Hebrew, etar, is also a spade. What's the idea of a spade? If you're a gardener, you put a spade in the ground and you turn the earth over. Oftentimes, in any circumstance, what activates us is the perspective that we have on that situation. Most probably most expressed in marriage, but it could be wherever your intensity might be. In other words, I have a certain perspective about this other person. Therefore, everything that I think about them comes from perspective. What did Yitzchak do? And it prevents birth, literally, but also figuratively. It prevents growth. The relationship cannot grow because the relationship is stuck in a certain box. But that box is created by your own perspective. It doesn't mean that it's not true. To your point, it doesn't mean that the circumstance is not true, meaning that the person is a jerk for taking the parking spot. But you don't know the whole story. And you've already defined the story based on your box, based on your perspective. If you can turn the spade over, if you can turn over the circumstance, change your perspective, and that's what the Torah says, the Yitzchak changed his perspective vis-a-vis Rivka, and then they had a child. So imagine this circumstance. You see this young kid comes in and cuts the old person who's waiting for the spot and takes the parking spot. So your immediate response is, this guy's a jerk. His parents must be obnoxious human beings. They raised a monster of a child. And you want to get out there and you want to say, you idiot, don't you have any respect for your elders? Perhaps if you were calm, not you, but one, and shifts their perspective and says, maybe he didn't see. Let's start with that. And it's
maybe I make another story. His grandfather is in the hospital, and the last thing he wants to do is eat strawberries. So he's parking right away because his grandfather is dying, and it's his last wish to eat strawberries. So he's running to the store to buy the strawberries.
Beautiful. So, but the point is that whatever
you have the story yourself.
You have to shift your perspective, right? And then you can approach the situation with curiosity. Instead of with judgment, you approach it with curiosity. And by the way, the whole thing will flow much better. Why? Because if you go to the guy and you say, did you notice that there was an elderly person that was trying to get into, or there was another person, doesn't have to be elderly, another person trying to get into that spot. And let's say the kid tells you, yeah, I could care less, right? Okay, so now, first of all, what are you going to tell the kid? He's a jerk. He knows he's a jerk. He actually just told you he's a jerk. So wait, don't waste your breath on him, right? But or he might say, I did see that, but my grandfather needs strawberries, whatever, or whatever other story. Again, this drama plays itself out in big situations, in small situations within ourselves, and so on and so forth. So I think the punchline is that it's our work to choose how to respond, not in denying what we see, but in how we're going to approach that. And if we can approach that with the puppy on a leash, calm, because we know that in this experience, there's opportunity for some profound divine experience, everything shifts. Yes.
Just made me also think that when you see someone, someone cuts you off the parking lot, immediately make it about yourself, right? Like, I can't believe they cut me off. That's the ego talking. Versus maybe they didn't see you, or maybe they had another reason. It's not about you, it's about them. So I think even another layer of it is not making everything about yourself.
Beautiful. And I would say that even the righteousness, the indignation, right? That's also an ego thing. Who made you God's policeman? Right? Again, it doesn't mean, I just read an essay yesterday from Rabbi Simon Jacobson. He was in a restaurant and he sees a father berating his child, and then he and his wife gets into a fight, and he was saying, like, should I say something? Should I not say something? Like, how do you deal with this? And he struggled with it. At the end, he said he didn't do anything. But then in Shul, when two guys were arguing, he went over to them. I guess he felt more comfortable with the two guys in the situation. And he said, listen, if there's anything I can do for you guys, I'm happy to help. But right now you're disturbing the service, right? So now one guy said, like, mind your own business. And the other one, kind of sheepishly walked away. But it is a struggle. What do we do in those situations? But the first place that we need to struggle is within ourselves. Like, what's really going on for me? that I'm having such an intense reaction to the circumstances in front of me. Okay, next Sunday is Thanksgiving weekend. We will not have class, but there will be a Hanukkah bazaar here from 11 until 4. We have over 17 vendors. Please come, buy your Hanukkah tchotchkes. And next Wednesday, we have Itai and Maya Regev, former hostages that will be speaking here upstairs. Please join us. A lot of fun stuff coming up. Hope to see you soon. Have a great week and a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.